back, everybody. Welcome to Stepping Out. I'm Bob Noonan.
And I'm Roger McDermott.
And this is our weekly broadcast. And today we've got somebody that Roger loves, I love. Was it a year ago we went to the Upper Room in
A
couple years ago, and that's in Mission Viejo, I think. The place was packed out. This guy had about an 11 to 13 piece band, rocked the place. There was only standing room only there. And hey, Bryan Duncan, welcome to the show.
Yeah, hi, Brian.
Hey,
Bryan
thanks. Should I clap? It's like, yay, 2 people clapped. All right.
Yeah. Well, I just read you have, this is after Sweet Comfort, 18 solo albums, multi-Dove Award winner, a Grammy winner for some things you did with Andre Crouch.
Wait, let me write this down.
It's all on
I might
Wikipedia,
need
Brian.
to endorse myself later. All right, go ahead.
Well, you know, you've obviously been around the block. Your stories are so funny. Bryan, you write music that people just love. And I said we opened with Love You With All My Life. And people don't understand that. That's from God's perspective, right?
Yeah, I've been accused of, because I talk directly to God most of the time. It's when I talk about you, and I would get blasted as a songwriter that does the God or my girlfriend kind of songs. But that one was kind of a surprise because it was from God to me, and it was what would Jesus write on a note on the refrigerator? Basically, it's like, hey, I'm gonna be gone for a little bit. I'll be right back.
Yeah. Well, Bryan, you have started this podcast, Nutshell Sermons, and I forgot to introduce you as my lunatic friend, because I think that's something he goes by now, right? Where'd you come up with the lunatic?
It just on the podcast. I didn't know what to think about Nutshell Sermons. When COVID hit everybody, I was unemployed for like 3 years. I mean, you couldn't do concerts anywhere.
Right.
And that was my primary source of income. And suddenly we weren't doing crowdfunded records either because nobody was making a living either. And Nutshell Sermons came up. I didn't think that I should attach it, to my whole name, because if it's a flop, you don't want to be associated with yourself. And
well, was it lunatic
so I just called
friend?
it, I'm going to call it Nutshell Sermons because, I was reading some of Oswald Chambers' devotional, and then I was doing some cross-referencing, and this one guy was talking about there's a difference between forgiving and excusing, and I'm going, wow, that in a nutshell, there it is. It was like, and I think that was the first one that I did because I thought, you don't need an hour and a half to get to a point, and so I started to do 2-minute mini sermons, and I'm just your friend on the back row. I'm not trying to be a preacher or tell you how to do it. I'm just interjecting my own thoughts and my own frustrations with life in general and trying to argue with myself about the Bible.
Well, the thing is, you say things that the rest of us think, and maybe we're too frightened to say it because you're just asking questions.
Sure.
Why is it this way? And, for instance, when you talk about how did you get to California, you tell people I got kicked out of a Christian college, which most of us would try to wear a mask on that one and say, God called me to the land of sunshine.
Yeah, I wasn't really sure what my calling was, but obviously I didn't fit in that particular school. There's a lot of rules, and I've had problems with that my whole life.
I think most of us have, Brian.
Yeah. Besides, at this point, I'm so old. I mean, you put me in jail for life, and that would only be a couple of years. It's like, how could I get hurt now?
Well, there's a theme. As I listen to Nutshell Sermons, it's about being real, Bryan. It's about, can I really say that? I know I'm going to offend somebody, but everybody, we always, you did one of your sermons talking about I'm walking on eggshells all the time. Can I just say what I'm thinking without hurting anybody? And I think we had John Lynch on, and he wrote True Face and all that. It's all about being real, taking off the mask, and finding real people. Like John says, you know, if you really want to confess and you really want to be real, you don't go to the DMV. You just find a few good friends. You don't go tell everybody in the world.
Well, yeah, my wife thinks I tell too many people what I think, and you know, sometimes it doesn't come back to do you any good. But I just don't want to pretend like I faked my whole life and then, you know, it didn't really amount to anything. You know, I want it to be, I want things to be true for me, and if I can stay on track. After I've been honest, you know, I did a little counseling time, you know, and I started to see how liberating it was to say something out loud that wasn't comfortable to hear, and find out who's still there. It's like, now you know who your friends are. That's all. And you know, being in Christian music, it's, you know, there's a certain, you know, facade that you put on to be, uh, you know, for people you don't know, and you don't need to throw up on everybody's coffee table either. But at some point, I remember times where you know, especially when I was going through some counseling, where I was so hyper aware of who I was not, that I remember going to some churches and everybody just seemed all shiny. And I remember hiding in the bathroom stall until I had to come on, and I'd go on and sing, and then we, you know, just go hide. Because, you know, it was a process of trying to figure out, you know, what does genuine look like? Is it always throwing up? Is it always telling the worst side of yourself? No, I don't think so. But it's being aware of who you've always been. And well, I grew up in Pentecostal church, you know, so you kind of were expected to just toe the line everywhere. And
Well,
at
your
the end of the
father was
day,
a preacher, right?
yeah, my dad was a Pentecostal preacher, and I mean, he was a good guy. He led me to the Lord. I don't have anything bad to say about that. But at the same time, I had to find my own salvation in fear and trembling. You know, God doesn't have any grandchildren.
So how did having a father that was a minister drive you to music and eventually maybe the Nutshell sermons?
Well, you know, he might be proud that he passed away back in 2010, and but I didn't want to be a preacher, because I mean, I sat on the back row of behind the pulpit, and I saw all the ins and outs and the politics behind it, and how people could be this way one time and then be this way back, you know, in the board meeting. And I had no desire to be a preacher whatsoever. So,
Did
but
that
I
drive
started
you
singing,
to write
and
songs?
that seemed to be fun.
That drove you to write music?
Well, what drove me to write music is that I couldn't play anybody else's. Like, well, you know what? If I make stuff up, it sounds like I know what I'm doing. And so that's kind of more how I started writing. I mean, my mom gave me piano lessons, and my dad played guitar, so I would go up there and learn how to strum. And he showed me how to play. You know, most of the gospel songs were 3 chords. Showed me how to play a bass on it, you know, so that I could, you know, fill in a church. When you got a small church, you know, you have to have lots of kids in your family so that you have some volunteers.
I've heard you describe Sweet Comfort, and every player in that band liked a different genre of music. How did you even come about, like, collectively getting your song out? Because you're much, I mean, I heard one time you were telling that you really liked James Brown when you first heard him, and he can hit those notes, and then Sly and the Family Stone. I had a friend
Mm-hmm.
that was in the group, member of the group Spirit. They did Nature's Way, I Got a Line on You. Jay Ferguson, the lead singer, Sly was his favorite band.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't think we knew that when we started. I mean, I was just happy to have a drummer and a bass player playing with me, and that's how it started. They were just gonna back me up on some gigs, and I went out to see them. Kevin and Rick were brothers, and they'd been playing for years together, so it was pretty tight from the very get go. But over the long haul, you start to understand that I favor this kind of music. And Kevin was a metalhead, and he liked Moby Grape and Mountain, um,
Mississippi
and Rick
Queen.
was he was a vocal guy. He liked Orleans and the Eagles, and then when we added Randy, he could play anything, but he was a kind of a jazz fanatic. He knew all the chords, and so I mean he could play everything, but it became a real train wreck. And in the studio, eventually you got a different sound than you've ever heard before because everybody goes a different direction.
Well, the band we saw last time, what's it called? Soul?
The Neo Soul Band.
Yes.
Yeah, I got it.
Man, you had 11 to 13 players there, a whole horn section, backup singers. I mean, it was an incredible show,
It
Brian.
was awesome. Yep.
Well, we had people, for good gigs. If this is a good gig, then we might could afford to bring a horn section, and we added a lot of people like that, and you bring in singers just for particular events, so you looked bigger than you actually were. Most of the time, though, even the Neo Soul Band was five guys. Sweet Comfort was four. But when we got back together to do Sweet Comfort Band, like 20 years later, we did a last record, almost 30 years after we'd broke up. And I remember it was all we could do to remember the songs that we played, but we needed some, added strength, because we weren't the people we used to be. And
Yeah.
so we had some background vocals filling in with us, and, an extra guitar player or two, because then you could enhance the live experience.
Well, Brian, getting back, I want to just jump in because, when COVID hit, everything shut down. As you said, you guys weren't on the road anymore. But listening over the last year or two to your nutshell sermons,
This world, I've been hanging around your people for some time. The longer I look around, the more I feel like I don't belong, even with those who don't belong. I think I'm a defective creature, and I'm not really new either.
and I send them to other people. And the feedback, Roger, I get is, he's thinking what I'm thinking, but I didn't want to say that. And I love the one, dear God, I don't like some of your friends.
Dear God, I don't like some of your friends. Do you have a list I could see of people you've endorsed? I find it annoying that the barely self-aware seem to have all the answers for me. I'd get a second opinion, but God people seem to regurgitate the same scriptures like they're handing out free prescriptions of dopamine.
Where did that one come from?
Well, that's how I wrote a book called Dear God, Really, and that was, I just came to the end of myself, and I got counseling, and I was in a facility for about 30 days. I'll just tell you right out. So I just wasn't coping well with anything, and I couldn't quite put my finger on why. But I remember the guy, one of the first counseling sessions that I did at this facility was the guy says, well, I want you to just write down, Dear God, and then just say whatever comes to your mind. Don't even think about it. What's the first thing out of your head? And, because I didn't know what to tell him. He's going, well, why are you here? And I'm going, I really don't know. I'm just tired of everything. And the first thing I wrote, I was like, Dear God, I don't like some of your friends. It was like, it was so fast that it was startling to me. And I'm going, because you're not supposed to like, Christians. I mean, you're not supposed to not like them. And, we're
Love
supposed to
one
love
another as
everybody.
I loved
and
you.
I didn't love anybody at the time. And, And then that's when I started to be really honest about stuff. I wrote this whole book called Prayers You Won't Hear in Church. And it felt to me like it was, resigning from everything. And then all it did was strengthen my faith. When you finally are honest with God about who you are and about what you really think, and God's still following you around, it's like, well, I could maybe live with him. He's not. The one thing I learned in the recovery that was stunning to me was God is not surprised by the things you do or say. And I'm going, whoa, I thought I was pulling the wool over his eyes. Imagine
Right.
that, thinking, I'm pulling a fast one on God. I even did one later. Is like I did another book called "Spoke to God." He said, and it was like I spoke to God. He says, I can hear the things that you're not saying. It's like I thought that was, I started to realize that I had a really poor image of who God was and how he felt about me. It's easy to tell somebody, oh, God loves you, but when I grew up, I heard, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only God," and it rolls off. But you lost me at world, "For God so loved the world." And I'm going, but that's not me. I'm not the world. I'm over here. And so a lot of times, the very scriptures that we thought were really nailing the gospel, you were missing the point in the first half of the verse. So it's been a process of trial and error. It's scary to admit to God and yourself and one other person the exact nature of the defects of character that you have, because the rest of your life you kind of assume that everything is a performance. Everything's a performance. You get good grades because you work hard. You do this, and so it's hard to attach an unconditional love of God to yourself when you're not performing well.
Do you find a lot of freedom in the fact that you admitted to God, to yourself, and to another human being the exact nature of what we call our wrongs or character defects? Did that redefine your relationship with Christ?
Well, that's an ongoing thing. You start talking about your defects of character, they just keep coming. And I'm going, there's nothing comfortable about it at all. And I remember one of my first counselors he was hysterical because he would ask me how I was doing, and I would give him this spiel about how I was pretty good. Things are fine. I'm doing all right. And then he would say, and he kind of grinned. He'd say, "And are you lying to me now?" And it was like, and it would piss me off. And then I would say, "Well, no, this is what I really think." And I just expected to be suspended like I was in Bible college, and for doing the wrong thing, and I wasn't. And he just sat there, and I remember telling him some of the worst things that I ever thought or I ever did. And he would just lean in and just would completely unfazed, probably like God is, going, "I'm not surprised by the things you do or say. I can hear everything you're not saying. So why don't you just speak up?" And I just started. And I remember the first time that he said, it was dumbfounding to me. He says, I admitted some really awful things. Well, here's what I'm doing, and here's what I don't want to do, and so nanner. And he goes, and he just looked at me and kind of grinned. He says, "And how's that working out for you?" And it was just that stinking simple. And he put it back on me. It's just like, well, it's not working that good. Frankly, I'm miserable all the time, and I'm angry, and I don't want to do I don't even want to do what God wants to do. And you're off on a tirade, and you're going, wow, nothing happens. It's like God does not leave the room when you admit your faults.
No, the opposite happens. This is a recovery show, and Roger's very open about his recovery. And it's only going on 30 years. And you know, I've had certain bumps in the road, but it wasn't until I came out and started telling people 20 years ago about childhood abuse and how I was molested by an older family relative that I trusted. And Bryan, we were talking about this. I realized at 5 years old, I couldn't tell my father because I knew my father would kill him. So now I'm protecting the man who took advantage of me.
Wow.
And now I'm going through life thinking, he molested me. What does that make me? You know, how we boys think. But you know what happened when I started telling that story in churches? I had people lined up, wanted to talk to me because no other man had told them they had been, you know, they never told anyone what happened to them.
Yeah. Well, you know, I know a little bit about that kind of thing, but you know, I mean, I grew up. I didn't think I had any problems because you know I grew up in a church home. My dad was a preacher. My mom was the preacher's wife, and you know we lived happily ever after. And you know, I remember being in there, and the counselor kept asking me about my folks. And well, what do you want to know about them? They're fine. They were the best people on the planet. Shiny as they could possibly be. Never had a problem. Never heard them yell at each other. And he's going. He says, "Well, just tell me a little bit about them." And I says, "Well, you know, they were evangelists. They spent a lot of time, you know, talking to visitors from, you know, that would come to church for the first time. So they spent a lot of time, you know, shaking hands with people they didn't know." And I said, "You know, I watched them," and I was pointing out the goodness of the fact that my folks would drop anything for a total stranger.
Yep.
And then he almost slapped me in the face with it. He says, "And how did you feel about that?" It's like it
Yep.
never crossed my mind to think about how I felt about it. It was like, and I sat there for a second, you know, because I'm trying to paint this shiny picture of my folks, and then I'm going, well, I kind of felt like I wasn't as important as a total stranger. And that came out of my mouth like, and I was dumbfounded. I think we ended the session right there because I wandered the halls for about 20 minutes going, well, I feel worse. I feel like I'm less than I'm not as worth as much as a complete uh, unknown, a complete stranger. And it never crossed my mind.
Wow. Yeah, Clapton wrote In My Father's Eyes, I'm sure in his recovery, but that was a sweet song. So Bryan, this you got to a place where you weren't pretending, you were just going to tell the truth of what was on your heart. And what I like about it is it's not pointed at hurting anybody or asking the question. And you come up with some possible solutions, but you're not telling anyone what to do. And there's a Mark Twainish kind of sarcasm and humor.
Wow, if you're
And
comparing me to Mark Twain, I'm that's a feather in my cap almost, man.
well, it is, and you know, you have double entendres. You write really well, and you know, a lot of times lyricists don't write, you know, script, and you do really well at both. But I think all I know is if I was hanging around with you as a kid, I know that you and I would have been on Ritalin for ADHD.
You know, I've been on Ritalin before, and it's really good, but it's a pain to get. You know, every time I would go for the refill, you know, you'd had to get a doctor's permission and go through all this stuff, you know. So I finally stopped, you know, bothering with it. But it was kind of nice. It ruins your appetite, and you lose 30 pounds in a hurry.
Isn't that going like
Is that what we need, Bob?
Ozempic? Is that what it is today?
That's a shot.
I don't know. You know, I started writing down names of drug things because they're making stuff up faster than you can keep up with them. In fact, I even did a nutshell sermon about, you know, the weird names for medications. Can't remember any of them now, but they all make up. You know, they've run out of things to call them. So it's like hoodly boo gobba snap. Be sure to get Goober Snap. It's like it's a wonderful drug, and they have a commercial of everybody being happy. It's like,
Bryan,
hey,
you talk about in one of your nutshell sermons, Roger. He talks about the fact that, sorry, a lot of Christians, you tell them something and you get the same scripture. It's kind of like printed out. And he said, they're giving it to you like it's a dopamine fix. Remember that one?
Oh yeah, like they're handing out free prescriptions of dopamine. I
Yeah.
can't remember what that would. Is that in Dear God? Yeah, it's in the.
Yes.
I
Dear
don't
God
like some
one.
of your friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Bryan, are your nutshell sermons, do they minister as much to you as the people that you're recording them for?
Absolutely. And I'm not trying to educate you. I'm trying to get through the irritations constantly that happen in your own life. I talk about being irritated with the disclaimers at the end of commercials on you're listening to the
Yes.
radio, and all of a sudden at the very end everything's really, this is great, and then all of a sudden you hear this guy in the background and you're going, okay, I don't know what he said, but I know
Yeah.
that this is not the truth. Whatever they said before that is probably not true, and there are some repercussions that they didn't
Bryan,
bother to tell you about.
When they go through the disclaimer on certain medicines, it goes like, I'll die if I take that. If you go through, you have an upset stomach, you'll have constant diarrhea. You don't take this if you have heart problems. I'm going, okay, it's not safe.
Well, I mean, that's just one story. I talk about being irritated with people or trying to look better than I am with some people, or because I was talking about the other day about what was it about how whatever this person looks like, the picture that they have up for their bio is what they think is the best shot of themselves. I'm going, so if their biopic is really ugly, you're going, wow, that's as good as they've ever looked. It's like, I did a whole nutshell on that one too, and I talked about not getting along with my wife, and then realizing that not only is God my father, but He's also my heavenly father-in-law, and I better treat her right. So I mean, they're smart aleck, but I'm not trying to teach you something that I haven't learned already, or that I have learned already. I'm trying to work my way through my own frustrations and irritations all the time, and that's why I just say, I'm Bryan, your lunatic friend on the back row, because if you're sitting in the back, with your classmates in school, you remember what you used to say. You used to, make some snide remark about whatever was happening, especially with
Well,
sermons.
Oh, yeah.
At our age, we've heard enough sermons in our life, if you grew up in church, to where you almost turn into a bobblehead. When the guy's preaching, you're going, you want to raise it. Wait, I have a concern. It's like,
That's a George Carlin kind of thing you got going on too, where he's constantly questioning everything. But no, I remember getting saved at 19, and we're in church, and we're all 19 years old. We're just messing around, right? And we'd be singing Amazing Grace, and when it comes to saved a wretch like me, well, we'd always point at each other, like saved a wretch like you. That's the kind of stuff we did in
I always
church.
thought they were saying saved a wrench like me. I'm probably a 3/16.
It could have been a wench. I don't know.
Well, Barry McGuire was talking about that. One of the best things I ever heard him say was he was talking about filling out a form to go through customs, and this is the classic, probably the songwriter, creativity person who just strains at a gnat, swallows a camel probably, but just take the simplest questions and go, wait a minute, well, you can't even answer the simple question. And he was talking about, they were saying, what was his occupation? And he says, man, I don't know. I'm not really that much of a singer. I barely strum the guitar. I spend most of my time traveling around. He says, I don't know what I am. And then he thought, well, I know Jesus, and so maybe I'm a light. And then he thinks, well, I can't be a light. Actually, I just shine the light that he shines on me. So he writes down reflector. That's his occupation. I'm a reflector. And I thought, exactly, I'm going, here's a guy who who can take a simple, stupid question and go and not come up with a good answer. Just here, let's make something else up. I was in the doctor's office the other day, and they called me in for a routine exam because I'm like 100 now, and so they worry about me. And so I go in, and then they make you fill out the same paperwork that you filled out the last time you were there. It's the same. Why are you asking me this again? Well, you don't know me by now. And I remember him saying, well, and what is the purpose of your visit? And I just, my shoulders drop. I'm going, you asked me to come in here. I don't know why I'm here. But rather than that, I put in, I, I, I can't feel my eyelashes. That sounded pretty desperate.
Brian, the last year and a half my mom was alive, I moved her in with me because she didn't want to be, she was always independent. My mom, up until a month before she died, was walking 2 miles. And it could be August in Southern California and it's really hot. And I'd say, Mom, let's just walk to the corner and back. She goes, you baby, just keep walking. If I can do it at 96, you can. But she'd get up every morning and say, well, I'm still here. And I said, what did you expect? She says, well, I prayed last night. He's not listening. I said, what did you pray? I asked Jesus to take me home. And so I said, well, Mom, there's a lot of people praying that, but he's not listening to any of us on that. And then she'd quit back, shut up kind of thing, or you're a brat.
Yeah.
But we had fun with that, but there does get to be a time where when people feel that my mom was one of those, had no purpose anymore. It was a struggle for her, Brian.
Oh no, you're preaching to the choir. I was a singer-songwriter for so many years, and I didn't know what to do with myself when COVID hit and I wasn't doing concerts and we weren't recording music. And I'm putting around the house, sitting on my back porch, and there's nothing worse, especially for a man, to not have something to do. A vision is one thing, but for the love of God, give me something to do. And so I was probably collecting coffee cans and sweeping the driveway 5 times, and just didn't know what to do with myself. And that's when I came up with nutshell sermons. It only took me 3 years to figure something out.
I love your Lily Tomlin on the chair kind of thing. Remember
Well, I didn't know what to, you didn't want one of those fancy icon looking, here I am, I'm the big thing.
No,
And I didn't
it's
want
hilarious.
intro music, no offense, but, I love Charles Swindoll, and I've listened to a lot of his stuff, but, they have the intro music, and then they have another guy come in, hi, welcome to this show, and they take like a minute and a half telling you what you're going to hear, and the thing is, I know what I'm going to hear. I came to hear Chucky. So it always just kind of annoyed me. Can we just cut to the chase?
No, but I like that. It's almost like a little boy in a huge chair, and it's almost like an inner child talking that's not filtered, right?
Well, you know what? It needed the icon needed to be something that you can just see the arrogance. I'm sitting in a chair that's bigger than me. It's like me on the throne or something. I've just got this, arrogant, I think I know what I'm talking about. And I thought that might be the best picture I've ever taken, because, you can see these albums, they always, take a really, really nice picture, and they spend 9 hours getting, a shot of you where you look like you're deeply spiritual and you have all these insights, and by dog, my songs are worth listening to. And, and then you go home and you're the same guy that you were before the photo shoot.
Brian, we were talking, and you have one of your nutshell sermons about, and I thought this was self-effacing. It was wonderful. There's been a lot said about, well, Christian music really wasn't music, and those weren't great musicians, and you had bought into that. And I'm thinking, I don't really know if I've heard a better guitarist than Phil Keaggy, for instance,
Yeah.
right? I mean, and your keyboard playing, your 3-octave voice, and there were some great musicians in there that chose to follow Jesus. Somehow they got, oh well, dismissed on some
Well,
levels.
you know what? You know what I think about that is, it's clearly there's a discounting because of Jesus. I think people are uncomfortable with that. They don't want to be near it. And so they're going to discount anything you do. I mean, as soon as people hear that you're a Christian singer or a gospel singer, well, gospel is a little easier to get by, but a lot of that is spiritual warfare. I really believe that if you're going to follow Jesus, it doesn't matter how good you are. Somebody's not going to like you because they don't like him, and that's the way I see it now. It's like, yeah, I felt like I was as good as anybody out there, but I'm not gonna. It's one of those things where you start to realize you do what you love, and then you love what you get, and that's the hard part. It's like you do something and you know it's good, and now you're irritated because certain people didn't like it. And that's always been the case. It's not just, it might not even be just Christians, but that ruined my career for a long time. The idea that I would make something I just thought it was the best thing ever, and then it wouldn't go where I thought it would go. I lost more awards than you can shake a stick at. Just like, are you kidding me?
You already
That
had your
was a good
speech
record.
ready, right?
Hmm?
You already had your speech ready, the award. But
Yeah, I'd drive home from the final mix of a record, and I'd be thanking the Academy for the award that I was going to get for this, and then just be dumbfounded. I'm going, you're kidding? That's what you picked to be the winner? And of course I didn't tell anybody that, but after the award shows and stuff, I'd be depressed for like 2 or 3 days and going, I felt really good about that until I got to the show and everybody's there and they say, and the winner is not you. And it was like, ah. And then they stick a camera in your face so that we can all see how humble you are to say, oh, yes, that's lovely that I didn't win. So, I've
well,
gotten over myself.
we talked about the Jesus Revolution, and in that movie, there was really only one band we saw, which was Love Song. And I love Chuck Girard and some of those people, but there's something I've seen with a lot of the Christian musicians from the late 60s and 70s that they ended up with nothing and they gave everything to the church. And I know a few of them are renting a back room, and they sold more Christian records. Now, this is a sad thing, and this is something I can't say in church, but I'm going to say it to Bryan Duncan. Barry McGuire told me that, and I know you're good friends with Barry. He said, Bob, when I was signed with Atlantic or one of those, Lou Adler was his producer. He said, if they put me on a concert tour, if they say a limo was going to pick me up, if I'm staying at the Hilton, they always came through. When I became a Christian and I went to churches, they always said, we'll give you the love offering. He said, rarely did they gave me 10%, and they didn't get me the room. They put a blanket in the foyer of the church of some peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
Ooh, I never had it that bad. We usually just we were driving to the next town anyway. We'd be in a van and I would sleep on the equipment. And that's where that rock and roll hair comes from, is, sleeping in the van on the way to the next gig.
Yeah, that's why Motley Crue looked the way they did, huh?
Yeah, well, they had a few other accoutrements to their look.
You think? So, a couple more things. Just give me a couple of, Roger and I, a couple things that you realized, things you can't say in church.
Things that I can't say in church?
Yeah, you wrote on that, right?
Yeah, it was like prayers you won't hear in church. It's mostly Like the first one comes to mind is, "Dear God, when can it be about me?" You're like, nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that. Like, and usually after church, that's the first thing that I'm pouting because we've been singing, "It's all about you," and I'm going, yeah, but I need a little time, just a little attention. Besides "Dear God," I don't know. I have to look at my own work because I wrote that book like 18 years ago now.
Yeah,
And
prayers you'll
I
never
just
hear in
started doing
church.
the audio clips of a book that I wrote from a long time ago, and now I'm doing new ones, but I can't remember any of them right now. It's like my head is a sieve.
Well, this has got to be keeping him busy. Are you starting to play anymore, Bryan? Going back to that, or?
Well, and a lot of the people I worked with, pastors and promoters, have retired or died. There's so the new generation is in church, and they don't really know me, and in a lot of ways, and you don't hear me on Christian radio. And Christian radio has changed. I mean, it's CCM is not. Of course, some of the stations are branching out, and you've got your 80s Christian music and your 90s and your whatever, but that hasn't generated the concert. Church isn't. They don't do concerts for evangelism's sake anymore, and that was kind of what we did in the Sweet Comfort Band. It was trying to reach others outside and we were writing songs for people outside the church and trying to get them to understand why we were where we were. And all of that's just changed. That's all. So I mean, I still play. I was over in Europe last year, and I played over in Sweden with a full band, but there's long stretches of nothing. And then I'll do a concert and stuff, but um, I don't know. I don't think we could draw the same crowd because I mean, let me just tell you, one of the last nutshell sermons I did was in Jesus and Music. I'm telling my stories about the different records that I made, and I was working on one where I'm talking about the friends that I had in Christian music. And then I started counting how many of them have already passed away. And I mean, there's like 30. I could mention 30 off the top of my head. And then I posted that on Facebook, and other people came up with almost another 60. It's like people that I worked with that aren't here anymore. I mean, they're gone. BJ Thomas is just the tip of the iceberg, and Carmen and Rick Elias and Keith Green, just Andre Crouch,
Andre
Sandra
Crouch.
Under Crouch.
Once you start, it's like there's a string of people that have already made it to heaven, and I'm feeling like I've overstayed my welcome.
Yeah. Well, the idea of, I've always thought if God keeps me here, I've got to do something. And, we were talking last week with John Lynch, and Bryan, the one scripture that gets me right now at my age, more than any other time of any other scripture, is Jesus said in the Gospel of John, I think it's in 14 or 15, is, "Just as the Father loves me, so also do I love you." John broke that down to say, "Equally as the Father loves me, I equally love you the same." If we could wrap our head around that, I mean, that's mind-boggling to me.
I don't know what to tell you
And he's
about
not
that.
sitting.
It's just I've become comfortable with the fact that it's like I reached a point when I started Nutshell Sermons where God was saying, I don't know if he was asking me that or not, if I was just thinking it, if God didn't want me to sing anymore, it's the one thing that I've been good at. Would I be okay with that? Would I be okay just knowing Jesus, and if he wanted me to do nothing? And that's why it took me 3 years to really be willing to walk away from anything that, God can give to you and he can take it away. And don't get me wrong, I think the gifts and the callings of God are without repentance. I don't think he takes them away, but for whatever reason, everything changes. We don't get to stay where we were. And I was surprised. One of the things I discovered in being stuck on the back porch for 3 years and unemployed is I got to know the people in my own neighborhood. I got to know my kids that I was never home for. And I've got 5 grandkids, and now they discovered that I'm available to babysit. So I got to to learn what I was missing. Um, at some point, you think you're just doing your thing for God, and you don't realize that you're ignoring some of the things God gave you.
I totally agree with that. I mean, I spent my whole life being a performer, not musically, but in the business world, and missing the things that I was really meant to be, which was a father and a husband and a good friend and other things. And until I got sober and clean and sober, that, my life began to change as I started to realize who I was in God and who I really was, and I accepted it. And you get transparent, you get open. I don't have any secrets anymore, and my freedom is priceless to me. That's why I relate so much to you, is because when you do the Nutshell sermons, I'm laughing right with you, and I'm relating exactly to what you're talking about, because I think it's all common with all of us.
Well, then we don't feel alone. Bryan feels that way too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The fellow.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say the fellowship through something like Nutshell Sermons is, to me, very powerful. Like it was when I listened to your music. You mentioned Keith Green. When I listen to No Compromise and some of his songs, even today, they stir a feeling in my soul and spirit that is unmatched. I mean, he just yanks things right out of me.
Yeah.
And I saw him at Calvary Chapel, and I saw him at Anaheim Convention Center, and I've never been so moved as I was with him, but as well with you.
Well, could I just leave you with one thing though? Is like I was really miffed when I couldn't do concerts anymore, and and now nobody even sees me in the daytime. I sit there on the back porch, and I don't get out much, and even with Nutshell Sermons, I sit on the back porch and talk to my iPad, like just this thing right here, just talk to myself, and I remember being really angry that I didn't have anything productive to do. Man wants to have a title. He wants to be king of something. And I am sitting on my back porch. And then all of a sudden, I'm watching all 3 of my granddaughters that live close by. At the time, there was only 3. There's more now. But I remember talking to my manager, and I says, man, I'm just babysitting. I'm doing nothing. That's what I said. I'm doing nothing. Just babysitting. He says, well, you should write a song about babysitting. And I just rolled my eyes and going, oh, I'm not writing a song about babysitting grandbabies. And that was, it was just annoying. I says, there's nothing. I looked around and going, there's nothing exciting about this. I'm just watching what they do. Well, after a couple hours, I started thinking about it, and I started watching them in a different way. And like I was there with them somehow. It was just different. And I'll just quote you a couple of the lyrics, okay? I came up with these lines. It goes, walking with a 3-year-old, sometimes she holds my hand, but mostly her adventures are where I prefer to stand. She only knows I'm watching her, but not the reason why. My smiling eyes are all she needs to dance and twirl and fly. Look what I can do, she says. I bet you can't do this. Look what I can do. Now watch me hold my breath. And I never knew till now this love could be the best. When I was doing nothing more than being here for this. And then there's this bridge that goes, and she starts her prayers with God is good. And she ends with yay, amen. Now, I'm not so sure who's walking who, showing me where to begin. That song
Yes.
is stunning. It's stunning, and it's a style of song that I would have never got if I was busy being me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And maybe that's what it takes. Maybe that's why God lets us be old and we can't walk as fast and we can't remember stuff like we used to. Maybe because He wants us to see the stuff we're missing.
You'd be the new Art Linkletter. Remember he had kids say the darndest things? Maybe you're not old
Yeah.
enough for that show. But there is such an innocence with them that I think we have to stop, drop, and roll to get it. You know,
Well, I'm glad I've got the time to do that. I don't miss airports.
oh
Now, I am
gosh,
playing a few gigs, but I don't even know what churches are teaching a lot of times now. There's some people out there that are saying some really bizarre stuff in the name of God, and I'm going, man, what would I do if I was on stage with them? So I don't know. I think the Nutshell Sermons is more what God wants me to do. I took it on as a second job, but don't get me wrong, I'm writing like 3 songs right now. I've talked to in the last week. I've talked to other Christian artists that have been around as long as me. Phil Kagi, Steve Taylor, Oz Fox, John Gibson. Um, I'm sure John. I haven't heard from him, but I heard from Kevin Max and Bonnie Keene from First Call, and they're still all around, and they're all doing what I'm doing, trying to figure out what the best thing is to do with their time.
well, Brian, if I had my way, you would go to churches, you'd be that stand-up comedian that you are, and in between you'd play a few songs, and the people would really get to, you gotta.
You know, the trouble is, um, the nutshells are funny because you don't see it coming. I don't get up there and say I'm a comedian, because then people fold their arms and they're waiting for you to say something funny. And the funny stuff is just an afterthought of what I didn't even see it coming myself. But it's just, there's a smart aleck about it. And they're not done in a row. I couldn't stand
Bryan
up
Duncan's
and
wait.
deliver a 2-minute thing at 100 miles an hour like that thing goes by.
Well, Bryan, I think you have a future in Bryan Duncan's view on the passing parade. Because that's what you do. You comment on what's going on around you, and so hey, we got to wrap
maybe
it up
I'm just
here.
God's color commentator.
There you go.
Well, Bryan, it's been great, and Roger and I have gone and seen you perform so many times, and I think you're a great gift, and I think the church needs to hear you because you say things that I've said many times that all of us think. Right, Raj?
I've loved you since Sweet Comfort, bro, and I've been with you and listened to you and your sermons.
He means that in a manly way.
Yeah, I love you.
Well,
dearly,
I'm hearing
clearly,
awfully
yeah.
nice things, and I'm not even dead yet. I'm going. It's like, hey, those sound like
We're
memorial
practicing
service kind of thing.
We're practicing for the service right now.
Yeah, but we're all the same age and we're all in the same place. So yeah,
Well, that's good news. I
We're
don't
also-
plan to leave anytime soon. I
Me
feel like I
neither.
should apologize for not having any afflictions because most of the people I know are quoting medications that take 2 weeks to learn how to pronounce.
Well, we either have afflictions or I find I'm afflicting people around me. So we've all got some afflictions.
Yeah. Well, that's probably your ministry right there.
Yes, yes. Well, Bryan, I want you to close off by saying, what do you really want people to get when they listen to Nutshell Sermons?
That they're acceptable. That God paid for everything. He paid in advance. That when you start doing things because you love him and not because this is how you be a Christian, it's just a different thing. It's not a performance, and it's really hard to get out of that. But because I know Jesus, I want to know how to get. Why am I feeling this? Why are you making me do that? This is really irritating. It's the kind of conversations you have with your friends. You talk about the daily grind, and I think that's all I want to get is to give people a sense that they can be comfortable with themselves, even if they're not uncomfortable in their circumstances.
Bryan, if some pastors are listening and they want you to come to their church and speak, or how do they get in touch with you?
You could call Christopher Redner at Make It Timeless, makeittimeless.com. And he's at Redner, Redner, Redner at makeittimeless.com.
Good. Well, Bryan, thank you so much.
I love seeing you, bro. I hope to see you soon.
Yeah,
in
maybe we'll
person.
see you again at one of those little clubby dates. I love those.
So, Bryan, we're going to lead out here. You're not going to hear it right now with I Don't Think I Fit In. Or is that Dear God, I Don't Think I Fit In? And do you remember that one?
I don't remember. I sent you two. I sent you You Pretended, and the other one was Dear God, I Don't Like Some of Your Friends. But yeah, I'm not fitting in. That is one of them. That's another one.
Yeah, it's a hugely funny one, and it certainly might be about the bureaucracy in the church.
Oh, there was one. Is Dear God, is there a bureaucracy in heaven?
I love that
what?
one too.
I'm not fitting in because I'm gonna have to go check and have my lawyer check it, make sure I haven't indicted myself for anything.
Okay. All right. For Bob Noonan
And Roger McDermott.
this was Stepping Out. God bless you all. Join us next time. Thank you, Bryan.
See you, Bryan.
And I'm Bryan. Thank you for coming.